Good morning. Thank you for coming. Welcome to the poetry reading by Walter Bargen, our first Poet Laureate in Missouri. Walter Bargen lives in Ashland, Missouri, which is just south of Columbia. He graduated from the University of Missouri with a bachelor's degree in philosophy and a master's degree in education, and now works at the university as a senior coordinator in the College of Education's Assessment Resource Center. Mr. Bargen has written and published 11 books of poetry. His poems have appeared in some of America's most respected literary journals, such as Beloit Poetry Journal, Georgia Review, Denver Quarterly, and Poetry Northwest. In 1991, he received a National Endowment for the Arts Poetry Fellowship, and in 2008, Mr. Bargen was chosen from a field of 135 talented poets to become Missouri's first Poet Laureate. He officially took the title in January of 2008 and will hold the position until January of 2010. His poems explore a broad range of human experience, poignancy and murkiness of what it means to love and be loved, philosophical musings, evocative snapshots of small-town life, and the archetypal power of large bodies of water. They are poems spoken with an unpretentious voice and demonstrate a keen ear for the music of a well-crafted line. Walter Bargen may be our state's first Poet Laureate, but he is not resting on his laurels. He is a working poet who carries a notebook because he knows poems are all around us, waiting to be rendered at a moment's notice and shared. He is often asked, "How do you write so much?" A question which only provokes him to respond, "I don't feel like I get to write enough." Let that be a lesson for all of us procrastinators. In the closing section of one of his first books, Fields of Thinar, he includes a quotation from one of the ancient desert fathers that the Trappist monk Thomas Merton included in his book titled The Wisdom of the Desert. It states, "If a man settles in a certain place and does not bring forth the fruit of that place, the place itself cast him out as one who has not borne fruit." Walter Bargen brings forth the fruit of wherever he is. If Missouri truly is the show-me state, we are fortunate that he was chosen as our Poet Laureate because his poems help to show us the natural bounty of this state and the bounty of a thoughtful life. Please welcome Walter Bargen.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you all for coming. Maybe I don't need this. Do I need this? Can you hear me? Is this better? Okay. It's been a very interesting journey that I've made over the past year and a half. The Missouri Center for the Book basically oversees the appointment of the Poet Laureate, although the appointment is actually made by the governor. And there were 135 nominees, and there were 4 finalists. I don't know who the other finalists were. And then I went in for an interview. The interview lasted about 45 minutes, which was quite surprising to me. I didn't expect to sit with the governor of the state for that long. And it turned out that it's surprising. A question that came to me just minutes before I walked in is, how do you explain that a Republican governor decided to create the position of Poet Laureate? The Missouri Center for the Book has been trying to establish that position for 10 years. And then in the final months of the Blunt administration, he called up the Center for the Book and said, "Let's do it." And he wanted it done very quickly. And it kind of was done quickly. It was a little behind schedule, but I was interviewed on December 19th, and part of the conversation was, "Oh gosh, I really do like poetry." This is the governor speaking now. And one of my favorite poets is T.S. Eliot, and I just finished rereading The Wasteland for the 3rd or 4th time. And I'm astounded, to say the least, because I would have a hard time recommending to any of you to read The Wasteland, unless you were a poetry aficionado. But that just opened things up. It just made it perfect, because I then launched into, "Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon a table. Let us go then down certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats, the lonely nights in one-night cheap hotels, and sawdust restaurants with oyster shells. Streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent, leading to an overwhelming question. Oh, do not ask what is it. Let us go and make our visit. In the room, the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. Well, I went on for another couple of stanzas. There's some great lines in the third stanza especially, where he says, there will be time to prepare a face to meet the faces that you meet. There will be time to murder and create, and time for all the works and days of hands that lift and drop a question on your plate. Time for you and time for me and time yet for 100 indecisions and 100 visions and revisions before the taking of a toast and tea. The reason why I bring that up is that I was in a high school a couple of days ago, and I ended up speaking to 700 students. And how many of those students do you think could identify that poem and the author of that poem? If I said 0, I would be lying, but if I said 2, that would probably be an overestimate. I find that utterly astounding. You know, here's probably one of the most famous and memorable poems of American literature, and these students did not know who that was. You know, T.S. Eliot, he's a homeboy. He did become a British citizen, but he was born in St. Louis and won the Nobel Prize. You know, what can I say? That's what the Poet Laureate is supposed to do, bring poetry to the people. Octavio Paz said that in older societies, poetry was at the center of society. And with the advent of modernity, poetry was exiled to the outskirts of society, and with it, he felt the best of humanity was exiled to the outskirts. And, you know, I've taken that to heart, and I've been trying to bring poetry back towards the center of society again. You know, I may have only moved it a couple of millimeters, though, but, you know, at least it moved, hopefully. John mentioned my very first book, Fields of Thenard. And one of the interesting things that fascinates me about poetry is that it enables me to bring into my life everything that I know and everything that I don't. Not everything, but at least something of what I don't know. But it allows me to bring the world into my life in ways that I don't otherwise interact with. And so in 1975, I wrote a poem called Beirut. It was about the civil war in Lebanon. And it's amazing that I read this poem, and it is deeply imagistic, but it seems as current today as it did, 30 years ago. Beirut. Machine guns inhabit the rooftops like hungry crows. Bullets peck the library, City Hall, the cobble streets, Allah's forehead. To the east, the mountains belch dust as artillery fires into the city, planting the bloom of brown orchids on the beach apartments, on the Hilton, in courtyards filled with the shattered rosary of bricks. People are opening their bodies for the world to read. The print still wet and so red, it pours out a stoplight on Broadway and 9th in downtown Columbia, Missouri. In a way, poetry suffers a similar problem to physics. Every once in a while, some physicist will come along and say, we've discovered everything there is to know about physics. So physics is basically a dead science. And poetry periodically goes through a kind of crisis in terms of, oh gosh, we don't have an audience. We're only writing for ourselves. And I would say, well, if a poet is really only writing for him or herself, that's the poet's problem and not the audience's problem. But what I found is that over the period of time that I've done this, that I've had a lot of very interesting encounters. And I don't know if any of you have ever read the Mad Farmer poems by Wendell Berry, but I've been thinking about maybe I should be calling these the Mad Poet poems. And one day I received an email from the university, an editor at the university, telling me about their website. They have a web magazine, and they have something called Google Analytics attached to it, which tracks information about all the people who visit the website. And in response to this exchange of emails, I wrote this poem. It's called Scantily Clad Poet. An editor of an online university magazine tells the poet that she's examined their Google Analytics. And the poet thinks a new geometry of attention that eluded Euclid, the axiom of how many people visited the website, the hypotenuse of where these visitors live, the theorem of what stories are read, down to sequencing readers' keystrokes. She has discovered that the poet is the third most popular key word used to search the website, after the football team and before the Golden Girls, not the TV sitcom. In other words, she says, the poet is less popular than football, but more popular than scantily clad dancing college girls. Who says poetry's dead? Later, she clarifies her earlier analysis in order to curb the poet's enthusiasm. The poet is not the most viewed, read story. That position belongs to a student named by Glamour magazine as one of the top 10 college women of the year. But the poet is the most searched for. Epistemologically, ontologically, profound implications. But for others, a poster on the post office bulletin board will do. Then she suggests the rankings might have been different if the poet had been shot jumping up and down in a cute red dress. Now the poet is hurt. Red is not his favorite color. Then the poet wonders what she meant by shot. I promised someone in the audience that I would read a poem because it relates to a friend that we have in common. It's from my book, Remedies for Vertigo, which was published in 2006. This friend of ours, who was a black belt in karate, was also very much a ladies' man. And I am not kidding. I am not exaggerating that at one point he had a girlfriend in Columbia, in Fulton, and in Jefferson City. And he would be always leaning on some of his friends. Oh, would you call her and tell her that I've been distracted for a while and I'll be a few hours late? He was quite the rogue, but he was such a nice guy. And I should mention that when he had 3 girlfriends, he was married. This poem is called Southern Perfection. This is kind of reflecting on his divorce and him entering into his new bachelor life in his middle age. Southern Perfection. On the map, there's a name floating on blue. He travels to a small island almost too small to find. The plane plummets through a sea of clouds. He has just left his wife, though she says, how can he leave what's never arrived? He gives up arguing and arrives at his leaving. His first heat-warped step is into the glare of the whitewashed decay of colonial mansions. He discovers the ocean is an ever-opening valve that becomes thick and hot the longer he lies in the sand. It reminds him of his wife, the sand radiating an endless sigh of dismissal. Farther down the beach, bathers take off their skins. The apartment he rents echoes nightly neighboring gunshots and a tireless steel drum music. Though it's a stray, the cat that already lives on the porch adopts him. Days later, he finds it dead on the stoop. Each evening for a week, there's a tarantula nailed through its abdomen to the door. He buys a car, the side mirror held on with wire. The first night parked in the alley, the headlights and taillights are smashed. It is a perfection, the breaking of what's broken. There you go, Jim. He has to run to class. Another one of the crazy things that I've done, maybe it's not so crazy, but I was asked to be the Grand Marshal of the Fall Parade. And, you think of poetry, you think of something serious oftentimes, something that's held high on a pedestal. And here I am being asked to be Grand Marshal of the Fall Parade. And there was a moment when I wasn't sure I was going to do it, but then I decided to do it, and that's what this poem is about. Poet as Grand Marshal of the Fall Parade. Doubting the gravitas, the decorum. It's poetry after all. And being led by a Boy Scout honor guard that's following a police car's flashing lights, their brown shirts sashed with merit badges, and behind them, the poet, bucket-seated in a low-riding, wine-dark sports car. Hand-lettered signs carefully cushioned with rags to bar fatal door scratches point to the poet. He's handed a small bag of candy to toss to the children, who are wondering why they're not watching Saturday morning cartoons, knowing Halloween is still months off, standing with their plastic Walmart and Moser bags, costumed in sleep, but waking to the brash high school marching band as it gracelessly plays what is half remembered after so few weeks of practice this early in the school year. There's 2 freshly washed tractors, a wagon pulled by mules, another by horses, the Women's Garden Club armed with rakes and shovels, the Women's Red Hat Society, a rabble from the Chamber of Commerce, the mayor banking in circles around the too slow procession, and whatever else falls in behind. The poet agreed, thinking this is what football players are adored into doing. But he's never led a team to victory, much less played. And he considered wearing shoulder pads outside his suit with poems scrawled in inch-high letters on the plastic pads. But he was afraid to confuse the one-person deep crowd more than they might already be as he passed out poems once the candy ran out. And so I actually did pass out poems. I had 4 short poems that I typed on a double-sided piece of paper. All pieces of paper are double-sided. That's kind of redundant. Anyway, there's 4 poems on here, and from 4 different authors. One of them happens to be me, and I'll read you that poem. It's called Flying on Instruments, and it's the final section to a longer poem called Experiments in Flight. And all the poems, in one way or another, are thinking about the process of writing, even though it never once mentions writing in it. And the very final poem, Flying on Instruments, is about creativity and inspiration. It's a simple story. You can take it as that, or you can maybe think about it in terms of inspiration. In the flashlight's beam, he follows the frantic flutter of a dusty brown bird up and down the shed's cobwebbed window, leaving dusk streaked with dust and stars. This bird, perhaps a flycatcher, tries desperately to fly deeper into night's glittering glass, as he approaches and fails at rescue before grabbing it with one hand rather than scooping with two. He is surprised by its weight or lack of weight and feels uncertain how tight to hold a handful of air. He steps from the door into the dark, and he almost doesn't notice his empty hands. One of the other poems, now think about this, I'm handing these poems out on a Saturday morning. It's unusually cold for early September. And I'm wondering, what kind of response am I going to get from these people? I mean, what are they thinking, after they see this? I never found out because no one ever responded to them. But I do hope that they read them. It probably came as quite a shock to them in some ways, because here is Earl. Now, I'm not saying oil, I'm saying Earl, the name. This is by Lewis Jenkins from a book of his called North of the Cities. And this takes place in the harbor of Sitka, Alaska. He's actually lives in Minnesota. In Sitka, because they are fond of them, people have named the seals. Every seal is named Earl because they are killed one after another by the orca, the killer whale. Seal bodies tossed left and right into the air. At least he didn't kill Earl, someone says. And sure enough, after a time, that same friendly, bewhiskered face bobs to the surface. It's Earl again. Well, how else are you to live except by denial, by some palatable fiction, some little song to sing, while the inevitable, the black and white, blind-siding fact comes hurtling toward you out of the deep. I really like this poem a lot. I like it a lot, especially because of the last line, or the last lines, the last sentence. Think about orcas, they're black and white, and here you have this white, black and white, blind-siding fact. And what is that black and white, blind-siding fact that comes hurtling toward you out of the deep? It's the fragility of our lives. At any moment, we could take a breath and that could be it. And yet he does it with such art in this particular poem. But also, he says, how are we to live except by denial? And I find that really interesting, because one of the things that I've gotten fascinated with is that I've thought about what would happen if all of us tried to strip away every story we are attached to. Basically, we are storytelling animals. And if we don't tell stories, what are we? We identify so strongly with the stories that we think that we are. And without those stories, I don't know if we have an identity, and we certainly are dependent upon our stories for survival. But our stories can also be extraordinarily destructive. And, that tells me, oh my gosh, if we're telling stories, well, isn't that kind of a fiction in a way? And if we are using those stories to destroy ourselves and others, why can't we rewrite those stories so that we can all live together peacefully and productively and sustainably, on this planet? And, I think about that, and I think about the Kalahari Bushmen. And I'm trying to remember the poem where I mentioned them. I don't remember. The Kalahari Bushmen used to live, they were a nomadic group of people who lived in the Kalahari Desert of southern Africa. And it's an extraordinarily harsh environment, as harsh as the Arctic for the Eskimo or for the Inuit. And they carry very little with them, because if they carried very much, that would just burn up calories, and food is very scarce there. And also, it would make them hotter because they'd have to burn those calories to expend the energy to carry that weight. So they carry almost nothing. Maybe they carry a bow and an arrow and a spear, maybe something to start a fire. maybe an ostrich egg stuffed with water. When asked what's the most important thing that they carry with them, it was none of that stuff. They said, it's our stories. Because it's their stories that enabled them to survive, that gave meaning to their lives. And sometimes I don't think we recognize how important stories are in our lives. Oh, by the way, they were, their origin story is that they came from the star Sirius, and is that right? Yeah, in the constellation Canis Major. So their story seems, wow, you know, what an interesting story. You know, it seems as valid as any story I can come up with. And so I go, yeah, we are writing fictions, and sometimes we need to get those fictions under control. I don't mean to be lecturing, but that's what Earl reminds me of. And that's what poems do. You know, they allow your imagination to play. And poetry is certainly the playground of the imagination. And so, thinking of imagination, I wrote a poem about cattle mutilation. And it was published in a small magazine. And then like 15 or 20 years later, I get a phone call. And it's, afterwards, I think, what a strange phone call. And this is a poem about that phone call. The poem was called Utterly Gone. And of course, it's a play on the word utter. And so this poem is called Utterly Again. A man calls from across the country. I hear him clearly, speaking out of the grip of my hand, the rain of his syllables flooding my ear. He's calling me about the last 2 lines to a poem published 20 years ago in a small South Dakota magazine. I don't hear thunder or the drumming of a downpour, but he's urgent anyway. 40 years old, working for an engineering firm that won't promote him until he completes a degree in something, in anything. So he must be in an English class. And he's been told to analyze this poem. The poem describes cattle mutilation, the details that turn our heads away as our eyes keep moving farther down the page. There's the irony of someone, them, traveling light years, hundreds of millions of miles to surgically remove the right ear and eye, the tongue and udder, all the blood and the sexual organs from a grazing Angus, the highest life form found in a tick-infested back 40. We talk for half an hour. It's his dime. He says each morning for a week he's repeated the last 2 lines. The one they take is a stranger to us all, and the one they take is a stranger to us all. I mumble something about Descartes, consciousness, mind-body duality. I don't believe I've been of any help. He swears it's just what he needed to finish the paper. I ask who is teaching the class, at what college, but he says he was asked not to disclose names. After his generous thanks, promised to have a check in the mail for copies of all my dusty books, a check that never arrives, I begin to wonder, to have doubts, who it was I spoke to, and maybe I shouldn't have given my address to a stranger. Isn't that what we warn children not to do? How could anyone have found that obscure issue of an obscure magazine, to have read an esoteric poem and assigned it for class discussion? Who was I really talking to? Maybe they think I know something, that these words are a code and a plot. In this room by the phone, it's growing dark. It's beginning to rain. Take me to your leader. Oh gosh, I have far too much to read. I don't know if I'm going to read this entire poem. The poem is called Flying the Flat World in the Key of G, and it's 5 short sections. Each section takes place in a different part of the world, and it just is kind of like little brief reflections on human stupidity. So hence the world is flat, and or maybe human ignorance. Yeah. My body leaks ignorance and desire. I just read that recently. I don't remember who wrote it, though. And I decided that the way to tie these together, and since, in a way, thinking of, human inability to rise to the occasion, why not make it the blues? I've never tried to hold a microphone and do this, so we'll see. Now, if I had really been organized here, I would have been able to jump right into the poem. Flying the Flat World in the Key of G, Denmark. And this is a little description of a man who is drunk in a bathtub who calls in a distress signal for a ship while he's in the bathtub. It's a phenomenal world. It's a phenomenal world. The man sinking in his bathtub knows this. He calls out for help. The coordinates somewhere in the Baltic Sea, west of Bornholm Island. Rescue ships are dispatched, but it's not where the man in the bottle is floating, soap in his eyes, the water tepid, even a little cold. Time to turn the spigot on, regain an amniotic warmth. Here, the waters gurgling and splash as the turbulent waves sweep across the deck. One man already washed overboard and lost. The claw-legged tub listing 45 degrees. How will he ever stand, not slip on the shifting tiles, grab a towel, hold steady by the sink, reach home port, face his stranded nakedness? Belgium. And this is about some tourists who go and pick up a stone. And what happens is they think because of the stone. No one said it wasn't heavy, straining the suitcase and the carrying. Scottish customs wanted to see the dark objects smudging their scanner. Explosives, uncut gem, lump of uranium, mad cow meat, contraband cheese. But just a stone. It was nothing that caught anyone's eye, there on a cold, windy hilltop at Clavacarnes, the buried bones centered in stone circles, a moss-encrusted celestial calendar so old it remembers forward. What a primitive, earthly souvenir to say they were there and still there, though across the channel in Brussels. Back home, his daughter breaks both her legs. He loses his job. His wife falls seriously ill. This is how stones are called home, through the mail, accompanied by an unsigned letter of apology. Perhaps all of you remember the fatwa that was declared against Salman Rushdie for writing a book titled Satanic Verses. And I was just, amazed that an entire little town would offer this up. This is called Iran. Who would dare to write so rarely that the raw words would uplift only to imprison the reader, though the readers in the city of Masad never read more than the satanic title? A mere $1 million is not enough for a writing life, as if any largesse could offer us more than the time being. Now 500 citizens have proffered their kidneys, right or left, the difference unimportant, to increase a life's bounty. The tolling already rung for publishers, translators, and booksellers. O God, what price is paid to stop another page from being written in this phenomenal world? USA. We've always known that we are all one, though mathematicians argue we could be as far apart as 6 degrees of one, where the sum of one's relationships quickly reaches billions. Yet we still don't know the name of the person in the seat next to us on the plane. So I really know someone who really knows someone who really knows someone, and so on. And here it is. Until the chief of a wandering band of Kalahari Bushmen and Winona Ryder are my confidants. So too are Elvis, the sequined king, and Jimmy, the retired 39th president, 6th cousins, going back to the daughter of a 17th century German immigrant. The White House and Graceland, freely commingling. So at the news conference, the president in a deep and hurting voice sings, "Love me tender, love me sweet." And we recall that kings are best remembered. Okay, I'm going to close with 2 poems from Harmonic Balance. It's kind of the Faces of Janus. It's tragedy and comedy. And I'll begin with the tragedy. The conceit of this book is that all the poems take place in the town of Harmony. And I actually have built upon that because Theban Traffic is a mythical town in the Midwest. And of course, the town of Harmony is also a mythical town in the Midwest. Trucking Confessions. This is the story of a trucker who is experiencing a lot of guilt and denial in relation to responsibility. I don't control the weather. At 3 in the morning, I have only 1 or 2 things on my mind, and that's mostly just get there. Get there on time. Get there and stop the passing neon smear through the side window that stretches across every city. Get there and forget straight ahead. Get there and remember to lie still and not swing at the first side-swiping remark. Like I said, what could I do? I'd seen enough deer edging the gravel shoulders, dead and alive, rotting and grazing, that I had 1 foot on the brake, ready for the sprinting phantom crossing the 2-lane. 18 gears and 18 wheels, 56 feet of hurtling metal, CB static and radio talk shows, preaching the Lord, apocalypse, welfare queen, secret governments, and alien corpses in cold storage. All a swirl and my horse head high, headed for the stars cab, though I could hardly see more than 100 feet ahead through sleet mixed with snow and night. It's movie magic, the way headlights pick up each dazzling flake and streak it toward the windshield as if I'm the only target of the universe. Like I said, the road conditions belong to the road I just have to get through. And as you know, on that bend in the poverty of backwoods and mountains in the southern reaches of this state, where the road conspires to tie itself up and send us back where we came from, Ice caught the wheels of the trailer and sent it swinging across the median, folding up behind me, a jackknife. I'm this giant metal blade sweeping through the dark, tires churning gravel, plowing half-frozen dirt, the steering wheel setting its own course, storm-beached diesel leviathan, and the van coming from the other direction is mangled, minced, cut in half, flipped, and by the time I've returned to time in a heart-pounding stillness, lights from north and south have flared from stopped cars. In the paperweight silence of spinning flakes, there's a family, 5 out of 6, who once knew something of this night, who had a bet on a destination and found it here in these sagging pines, who knew of others who will keep waiting even after the phone call. What could I do? What else could I do? I've got to get some sleep. The road keeps jackknifing in front of me. The last poem that I'm going to read is called When the Cows Come Home. And I had sworn off reading this poem, and now I have someone to blame for my reading it again. And that is, I received a phone call saying, oh, we really want to interview you. We can do it via telephone, and it's going to be Friday morning at 8:15. And so I left a message saying, sure, I'll do that. I've had this problem that I've known, I've had it for years. I call it the Ado Annie complex. It's from the musical Oklahoma, and Ado Annie is the girl who can't say no. And, I just overbook myself all too frequently, which is, I should be happy. Hey, I should consider myself lucky that that's happened. But anyway, so I say yes. I get a phone call 30 seconds before 8:15. I have enough time to ask one question: how long is this going to last? And Tori says, oh, it'll last about 5 minutes. Now, I have agreed to do this, but I'm really suffering a great deal of trepidation. I just feel really uncertain about this. I know nothing about it. They never gave me the call letters to the radio station. I have no idea what's going on. Well, I'm sitting there with the receiver up to my ear, and the phone goes silent, and then suddenly I'm holding the receiver out here, because here's what I'm hearing. And now, here we are, smash, smash, morning radio, my 103.3, and we are here to talk with the Poet Laureate. And I just mentally, I just curl up into a fetal position. I'm going, oh, this is a train wreck. This is a train wreck. How am I going to survive this train wreck? Well, it turned out that actually it was not bad. We seem to have figured each other out. Do you guys listen to Smash on 103.3? It's a St. Louis radio station. Here I was just going, I'm going to be run over by an over-caffeinated morning personality. But somehow we worked it out, and then he gets to this point where he says, I applied for that Poet Laureate position, and I wrote a poem, and I never heard anything back. And of course, you can't apply for the position of Poet Laureate. You can only be nominated. And I know that you didn't have to write a poem for it. And so then he says, oh yeah, let me read you this poem and you tell me what you think. I'm back into the fetal position. And he reads me the poem, and the poem basically is a little thing that many of us probably learned when we were in 3rd or 4th grade. He elaborated a little bit on it, but it was something to the effect, birdie, birdie in the sky, drop some white stuff in my eye, and then it ends with, I'm just glad that cows can't fly. And so I'm speechless. I am literally speechless. I'm going, what in the heck am I going to say? How am I going to respond to this? My brain is like a cat stuck in a box. It's clawing at the inside of my skull. And suddenly it comes to me, I think the poem speaks for itself. And I heard everyone in the radio station burst out laughing, you know. And then I said, you know, I'm not above writing a poem about that subject. Let me read you my poem. And so I read over 103.3, it's probably never happened before, When the Cows Come Home. And it's about two boys who go camping. Where my friend and I camped once a year, late in the summer, was between high pine-studded hills. It was my grandfather's dairy farm, and the herd pastured there sometimes, but not recently enough to crop the grass back. We cut a wide circle and pitched a canvas tent. Nights were already chilly, and I decided to collect firewood along the edge of the field. My friend stayed in the tent to arrange the food, flashlights, axe, water bottles, and whatever else we hauled from the house. From the pines, I saw a Holstein herd. 12 cows plodding toward the pond, the tent directly in their path. I dropped the wood and ran, but they'd already reached the clearing. Bovine curiosity had lined them up, shoulder to shoulder, crowding together, packing in their thick, curly heads to stare into the odd opening, their wide eyes swimming behind black and white snouts, hardly smart enough to ask the question to the answer they found. My friend, a dedicated coward, trapped in the tent, pressed against the back wall, lunged for the pistol loaded with blanks and fired wildly. The cows too close together to turn around, too stunned to run forward, too shocked to back up, and wedged together in their fear, rose in unison on awkward hind legs, their front hooves galloping in the air, udders indecently exposed, a chorus line of herbivores. And as if on cue, they emptied themselves of an afternoon's grazings, covering the entire circle of cut grass, the tent inside and out, sleeping bags and firewood. After bowing to their own abundance, they came down running away from a world that had suffered a mammoth, overripe hemorrhage, and back to the barn where they didn't give milk for days. Thank you. Are there any questions? Does anyone have any questions? You know, I actually only read from 2 books. There were so many more books I could have read from. I feel like I haven't done them justice, but well, that's the way it goes. Any questions? But I finished what I would identify as my first poem when I was a junior in high school. So you could say I've been writing for about 40 years now. And who knows why I became fixated on poetry and why I kept writing it. I'd say for about 35 years I tried to write a poem every day. Now that doesn't mean that even a tenth of them were any good. But you know, writing is a muscle. You have to exercise it. It's just like reading. You can't be a writer without being a reader. And you have to do both of those every day. In fact, Ray Bradbury, science fiction writer, says you should read poetry every day. He reads poetry every day because it stretches the mind, because it makes it brings the senses to life. And you know, if Ray Bradbury, the foremost science fiction writer in the United States, says that, all of you should take his advice. And you know, if you want to be a poet, then you should be reading a minimum of 1 book of poems every week, a minimum. And you know, I can keep you busy for about 5 or 6 weeks with books of poems. So I expect to see you up there. Just joking, just joking. Yes?
Did you do story writing before you started poetry?
No, that was, you know, probably what got me interested in writing was my 8th or 9th grade English teacher. And I don't recommend this to English teachers, but basically one day out of frustration, he shouted at the entire class, "Get out a piece of paper and write me an adult sentence." And all of us looked at each other. An adult sentence? What's he talking about? And so, you know, we worked really hard for about 20 seconds and handed in our pieces of paper. And of course, he spent about 20 seconds looking at them and then dramatically threw them in the air and started stomping back and forth and telling us none of us knew how to write an adult sentence. And basically, he kind of shamed me into being interested in language because what we were writing was, SVO, subject, verb, object. Dick chases the ball. Jane chases after Dick. Or we probably didn't even have an adverb in there. So, he wanted something that embraced an adult subject, that had an extended thought in it, that was really engaging. And none of us were capable of doing that at that point. And so that probably gave me a kickstart.
So it's pretty much been poetry.
Well, I have an essay in the latest issue of New Letters, which actually has been nominated for a Pushcart Prize. It's called Potholes Along the Yellow Brick Road. And it's about an experience that I had in Coffeyville, Kansas, where I spent a week doing quote-unquote humanities presentations to, it turned out to be one high school, and that high school was in Caneyville, not in Coffeyville, the junior college there, and then 17, maybe it was 15, assisted living organizations, groups, buildings, whatever. And it was just the shock of that I was writing about. And I've written a few short stories. They're very strange, though. The editor who wanted this essay said, this is really like a 10-page poem. And I think that's my problem. Once I get over, the short stories I write, maybe 5 or 6 pages, and they really are poetry. And 2 of my books, The Feast and Theban Traffic, are prose poems. Yeah. Yes?
Are there any poets or books of poetry you'd recommend to a college student who doesn't normally read poems?
Not knowing what you're interested in, it's kind of hard to give you. I can give you a basket full of names. I think you would just knowing her subject matter and knowing that you're young. I would suggest Sharon Olds, OLDS, is a good place to begin. Her poems are easily understood. They're very direct. They're very emotional, though, and she holds nothing back. She holds absolutely nothing back. So they're pretty explicit at times, and that I don't know if that would offend you or not, but Sharon Olds is great. I'm a great fan of Charles Simic, but he tends to be towards the surreal side of writing, which I sometimes tend to be too. I didn't read you any of those poems. In fact, the Kansas City Star said my writing ranges between rural revelries and enigmatic surrealism. And of course, it does, but I didn't realize I was enigmatic along with surreal. I thought surreal would be good enough.
Thanks.
Surreal being like, on the crest of each wave, the day dances with white tap shoes. Images that you normally wouldn't experience.
That you normally wouldn't put together.
Well, I would normally put together, That's the way I see my world, but other people don't seem to. I'm always surprised when they say that, like a English professor was reading Theban Traffic, and he said to his wife, "This is really far out there." And I didn't think it was far out, In fact, on the back of it, there's a claim that I'm probably one of the foremost socio-political poets in this country. I don't know where that came from, but it sounded good, and it was a lovely blurb beyond that.
What fascinates you about the bodies of water?
I think when you get landlocked, Robert Hass, a former Poet Laureate of the United States, said that a really good poem always contains its opposite. And so, I think that that's probably true of all of our lives. Too often we get married to our opposite. I can swear by that one. And So a body of water, hey, I'm in the Midwest, I'm 1,000 miles from any ocean, so I crave water. You know, and and if you were into astrology, which I'm not, but, I'm a water sign, so, maybe, if you want to think about it in those terms, but water just seems so expressive to me, and it's such a great vehicle for writing poems. You quoted the wisdom of the desert, about bringing forth fruit in the place where you're at. Well, I found that the Missouri River was what gave me a really strong sense of place. And so the body of water is a trilogy which was published in the 90s, but the body of water came out in 2003, pulling all of those books together. The titles, Yet Other Waters, The Vertical River, Water Breathing Air. In fact, just a side note, that's a trilogy, right? But I then discovered that I had a 4-book trilogy because I wrote Remedies for Vertigo, which is organized around the air of flying, of flight, and it all comes from the very last lines of the very last poem in the trilogy. So when we step out of the boat, we too are falling from the river and into the air, falling into nothing that can save us. So I have a 4-book trilogy now. And then I discovered that I had a 5-book trilogy because West of West, the title comes from a poem in the body of water. And I lifted the very opening poem in its entirety, Vacation at the End of the World. So a 5-book trilogy. And now I realize I actually have a 6-book trilogy because a book that I'm working on now is called Sky Yet to Weigh. And I think it fits very nicely in there. So because I don't think that they'll ever be all printed together, it's a 6-book trilogy. Yes?
I just wanted to say that your Trucking Confessions poem was amazing.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
And the way that you write to show and just describe how telling it's amazing.
That probably comes, I spent 4.5 years writing construction specifications and construction contracts, and it just made me very attentive to detail.
It's amazing.
And I think the body of water is just filled with that kind of detail, even though it doesn't contain that particular poem. Well, thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you once again, Walter.